Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm so pleased to be here. And thank you, Amy, for those incredibly kind words. It's easy to make the people here look good because we're all tremendous partners. And I'm flattered to be among you today. For those of us just joining, you missed an incredible opening keynote, which was recorded. So it's not your last opportunity to see it. It was really thought provoking. It helped me think and I have high hopes that our next session, actually high expectations, our next session will help do the same because we have such an incredible speaker. So let me just start off by saying my name is Susan Hayes McQueen. For those I haven't met, I go by she and her. I'm in development services, which is part of university advancement. I'm here to host though today. I'm not here because I have expertise. I'm here to learn alongside you and to listen and engage. Here's how it's going to work today. I'm going to start out with some introductions, start Michael off with a question or two. Then it's your turn. Make sure to ask questions. Use the thought exchange link that they've so helpfully provided. Use the chat. And Amy's going to make sure that those get over to me. So thank you in advance, Amy. Michael has a lot of wisdom to share, and I'm eager for this conversation. So I think you will enjoy it as well. For those of you who weren't here in the first session, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. University of Washington, and where I am broadcasting from West Seattle acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Squamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot, and other nations. I'd also really like to take a minute and acknowledge where we're all at right now. There's some pandemics going on. COVID is very hard on us, and we all know it has impacted people of color more profoundly and is continuing to expose the structural racism in the country in community funding for healthcare and education. And I wanted to thank you, the audience member, for taking the time, even though things are so difficult right now, taking the time today to work through this and to learn alongside. I acknowledge we're all in different headspaces. So whatever you need to do to check in with yourself or leave the conversation, please do so. Self-care is really important right now. Now, without further ado, the most important and exciting part is introducing a wonderful member of the community, Michael Brown. Michael Brown is currently the chief architect of Civic Commons, which is a new regional civic infrastructure of the Seattle Foundation, affiliated with Seattle Foundation, and it's aimed at uniting more community voices in decision-making to advance racial and economic equality. Before that, he served as the Seattle Foundation's Vice President of Community Programs, where he oversaw the Foundation's community impact efforts, strategic grant-making initiatives, convening activities, and impact investing programs. So he's got a lot of experience in this area. Since he began his tenure at the foundation in 2001. He's led efforts to elevate community voices, which is, I think, what we all want to learn more about today. He's been tackling complex challenges in the areas of affordable housing, economic and racial equality, policy, and advocacy. He's also a Husky. He's a graduate of the Evans School, a supporter, a board member of the UWAA. He's a donor volunteer and an alum, a perfect trifecta. So a big thank you from the university for your service, a big thank you for being here, and a personal thank you for taking your time today to have this discussion. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Susan. Thank you.
And we're so glad to hear from you today, and there's so many great topics. I personally love a little bit of context, though. Can you describe a little bit about what brought you to where you are today?
It's a great question, and I will say we'll first start off with I hope everyone enjoys the photo because when I started the Evans School, I was 7 years old. So yeah, I in a rush I sent I sent the pic of my kid versus my headshot, but that's fine. It's still kind of the same thing, and actually it actually puts some additional emphasis on the work I do. So how did I get to where I'm at? So when I left the Evans School, I was really fortunate. I've had a very fortunate career path. Left the Evans School in '95 and went to work for a nonprofit organization, statewide nonprofit organization, And then 2 years later, my boss at the time became a Seattle City Council member, Richard MacGyver, and I went over to council with him. I was a legislative aide, and then his chief of staff. And then in 2001, I started at the Seattle Foundation and have been affiliated with the foundation since. And I think, one of the things I look back on is just, one, having some really incredible mentors who helped along the way and helped me find a path. But two is also this commitment to community, and that's not really lip service. I think it's an easy thing to say. It's like, oh, I have a commitment to community, but essentially everything that I've done, my work at the nonprofit, my work at city council, and then my work at the foundation has all been about the empowerment of community, and in particular communities that have struggled with inequities and disparities, regardless of what it looks like. So my work has thankfully has always kind of led me to a place where I've been able to have access to resources and the ability to utilize those resources or influence those resources to address the big issues that are facing the region.
I love hearing about that background. It is so varied and such an important approach, especially through advocacy and through the government work too. I'd like to acknowledge that Seattle Foundation is it's a hallmark, it's an anchor in our community. But in the past few years, Seattle Foundation, and now your work with the affiliated Civic Commons, is really approaching dramatic changes and finding ways to involve the community in funding. Can you describe that and describe how it came about that we would head that way?
Yeah. So when you've been at an institution for a long period of time, almost 20 years, I mean, you see everything and you experience everything. So when I started at the foundation in 2001, we were a very traditional grant-making institution. We had a quarterly grant-making program that organizations would apply for funding, and that was essentially it. We approached things in a peanut butter spread. That is, everyone got a little something, and we were okay with that. That for us was the role of the Community Foundation at the time. But over a period of time, and in particular, once I stepped into the vice president of programs role, that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, if the thing that determined success for the Community Foundation, for Seattle Foundation, was the number of grants that we were providing versus the change in outcomes that we said that we were trying to get to, well, that was a problem. So this happened to coincide around the same time the foundation was launching a strategic plan. And one of the things that I, and I'm not going to deny that it was not an easy task, but I and my team, and then moving up to the leadership team and then to the board, proposed was a fundamental shift. That for a community foundation, we weren't necessarily serving the community as best as we could. And that while we're all well-meaning individuals, we still had a ivory tower approach, i.e. we were making decisions around investment and what we thought would help address needs in the community, rather than actually engaging in conversation with communities and community members and those who have lived experience. So thankfully, it took a long time, but we were able to get the board on board, and we dismantled that grant making program. And moved towards one that was laser focused on racial and economic equity, one that was focused on upstream approaches, one that was focused on policy and system change. And for me, as a lead of the team, I mean, that was a really important approach to take, because once again, if and this is one of those dirty things that doesn't necessarily get talked about in the philanthropic community, but institutional philanthropy, we're also nonprofits as well. So we should be meeting mission. And if our mission is to create a healthy and vibrant greater Seattle region, then doing 400, 500 grants and spreading $8 million wasn't the way to do it. And we're making a bit of a calculated risk that this new shift and funding differently and actually engaging with community in a different way, more of a partnership, would actually help us move closer to the mission that we said that we wanted to achieve.
Your comments about the ivory tower and being the establishment, it resonates here at the university. We often look at what we do as, can we get the most people involved, not necessarily looking at that outcome, or can we raise the most money? So for us, we'd like to also switch the way we look at things to outcomes based, right? To making the impact. That takes a lot of extra work, which is what's important and what's here today, and obviously something you're extremely skilled at. How do you encourage members of the community to get active voices out there? If we want to do work, we want to be inclusive but not tokenizing. We want to include our students and faculty and staff in our conversations with the community. How do we do this in the Seattle area without putting a burden on the communities we serve and not being the ivory tower?
Right.
How do we encourage that?
It's a great question, Susan, and now we get to venture into the fun territory. So let me just give folks a bit of a sense of a community foundation. And a community foundation, in many regards, I mean, if you kind of think about it, we're a big mutual fund. So the foundation has been around for almost 75 years. And individuals, families, corporations, over that period of time have set up funds that they have the ability to direct. Essentially it's their checking account, their savings account, to support organizations. At the same time, there have been individuals that have left resources to the foundation to steward in perpetuity, and that's the endowment. So for my team, for instance, the foundation last year provided about $130 million in grants. Of that $130 million, my old team, the community programs team, administered about $10 million, or 10% of that, $13 million. So the vast majority of it's donor directed. So I just wanted to provide that frame, because then it leads us a little deeper and also into some complexity around the question that you asked, Susan. So going back to the old grant making program, while we were doing the peanut butter spread, and I wasn't crazy about that, what it did do, though, was give us the opportunity to talk with over 400 organizations every year. So we did site visits. We met with every organization that applied. We didn't screen anyone out. And what that allowed us to do was build a relationship. And that kind of gets a little bit to your question. The collective we don't do an effective job of building relationships. We think we do, but we don't. What we do is that we enter at a transactional stage, i.e., there's something that you have that I would like, so let's have a transaction where I can get what I need, and then we move forward, et cetera. Versus, being intentional and taking the time to build relationship. And as we all know, in any relationships that we build, you don't do it in a 2, 3, or even 4-month period. It takes time. And this is one of the biggest criticisms that I have about not just philanthropy, but in fact, a lot of institutions in terms of its interaction with community. we don't want to take the time to build relationship. And as a result, community tends to be a little pissy when we do come, because they know that we come in to extract and not actually engage and build a relationship. So I say all of that. The benefit for Seattle Foundation, once again, was that we were out there and we were building relationship. And as a result, we were able to build trust. It doesn't always mean that we're going to be on the same page, but at least the door is open. And as a result of that, then, if you have trust and you have a relationship, you get to have some different types of conversations. Well, let me just take a little bit of step. You get to have some different type of conversations, but that also requires you to listen. Because once again, you could do all of those things, but if you don't pause to listen and actually incorporate the listening into the work that you're trying to do, then it's kind of the same old. You just put a better wrapping paper around it. So for Seattle Foundation, as we're going through this evolution, we had trust, we had relationship, but then we had to show that we're actually listening. And when we were shifting the grant making program and going out and doing co-design, we were clear that we wanted to do that in partnership with communities. So we held dozens of community forums and really kind of, trying to get from our nonprofit partners especially if this is the frame that we're working toward, racial and economic equity, policy and system change, upstream approaches, what were things that they wanted to see from us. And once again, you have to go beyond lip service. So, yes, you can kind of spit this back out in the document and say, hey, this is what we heard. But then how do you, are you actually implementing it? And then are you showing that? There's a simple equation that I work with, especially in Civic Commons right now. And it's a pretty simple one, but it's the hardest thing to do. In order to get to the transformational, we need to build a relational and experience a transactional. So once again, I would just emphasize that for University of Washington, for Seattle Foundation, for City of Seattle, for Challenge Seattle, doesn't really matter who it is, that if we want to change outcomes, or we want to have we want to show up differently, we have to be intentional about that, and we have to break bread. We have to actually build relationship, and and be patient about doing that. We move quickly towards expediency versus actually taking the time to build relationship and shift things.
I really appreciate what you said about that, the difference between the transactional and the listening. Can you describe, without necessarily using specific names, but describe an example of a relationship the Seattle Foundation had before you went through the process of engaging these 400 nonprofits and listening, and after, and that trust building part?
Mm-hmm. So I'll give you a very tangible example. So once again, we were a peanut butter spread funder. So, and we took pride in making 400 grants over the course of a year. As we were evolving to current state, data was in front of us, and we were kind of thinking through where could we have great impact. And we started to look at South Seattle and South King County because we knew the suburbanization of poverty was increasing. And for us at the time, we were really focused on one of our key issues was economic opportunity. At the same time, we were in conversation with our colleagues at King County, and they were also utilizing data. And we're interested in a place-based approach in South Seattle, South King County, but looking at it more from the lens of health and housing. So we decided to kind of to mesh our efforts together, and what we did was create a new initiative called Communities of Opportunity. But what would have happened in the past, Susan, would have been that the foundation in King County would have, gone back into our secret squirrel room and have come up with our strategies, utilizing best practices. We'd pick up the phone and call folks at the Brookings Institution or Urban Institute, or, kind of continue to cull through quantitative data and map out a strategy and then pop it out into community. Community, should respond to our RFP. And if you want our money, these are the 5 things that you need to do. Well, thankfully, because we were in that evolution, we didn't do that because we knew that had never worked. So what we decided to do is something different. So we're not building an RFP because we don't know what we're trying, we know what we want to solve. We just don't know how to solve it. Wow, here's a novel concept. Why don't we actually go out to South Seattle and South King County and actually talk to some of our partners and get a sense of how might we address this? Here are the 3 areas: health, housing, economic opportunity. What we want to do is something different. What we want to do, colleagues in the community, partners in the community, is we actually want to give you control. You get to have, the term RFP, request for proposals. It's a grant making term. It's basically how folks apply when there's an initiative that a foundation has. We went out intentionally, utilizing the relationships we had and trying to build some new relationships, but essentially said, hey, this is what we want to do. And we think actually there's strong alignment here, given the work and given the issues that, all of you are working on or trying to address in this broad sub-region of King County. But we don't quite know what the best strategies are. So we need your help in building these strategies. So this comment gets right to the question, Susan. So once again, one of our partner organizations, and she wouldn't mind if I mentioned her name, Celie Savusa, who runs the White Center Community Development Association. And Celie and I have known each other since 2001. And Celie and I built a relationship and a high level of trust. And, those of you who know Celie would also know that she is not shy in terms of expressing her opinion and thoughts. And Celie said when we first pulled folks together and she came to me and said verbatim, if y'all end up doing the same old bullshit that you do, I'm going to come, Michael, to your house and kick your ass. And I said, fair point, Celie. We're trying to do something a little different. Hope we don't get to that point. And I say that with jest, but that I think kind of highlighted that, even when you're trying to move into something new, there was still this fear that we were just putting on new wrapping paper, but fundamentally the same things were inside, that we weren't going to do anything differently. And what, so what that was 7-8 years ago, Celie and many of the folks who were at the front end and are now with us as partners, fully engaged partners now, are the first ones to say, we didn't believe that Seattle Foundation or King County were fundamentally going to do anything differently. And they have. This is an effort where it's community-led, community design, where we as Seattle Foundation and the county, we're not even funders, we're partners, we're investors. And just to, I'll close it on this. So the foundation we put in $5 million for the initial or first phase. The county came later through the levy, Best Starts for Kids levy, and added roughly about $8 million a year. So depending on the year, there's about, it could be anywhere from $12 to $14 million that the Communities of Opportunity has to drive its strategies. But we created a governance group that is more than 50% community members. Seattle Foundation has a seat, the county has a seat, one vote, one voice. And essentially the community partners, really get to decide where those resources are being invested. And that's a win, because once again, community-led, community-driven. But more importantly, where both the foundation and the county are more than comfortable with that. There are times that the governance group will make a decision that I don't agree with, but I have one vote. So, just another example of how build relationship, but more importantly, if you want to do something different and actually engage with community in a different way, how do you share power and let go of certain things in order to facilitate that move?
How have you helped colleagues, even from King County or also the Seattle Foundation, understand that step of being able to give over the power? You're the one with the money.
Yeah.
You've got the power.
Susan, I'm not going to deny that is probably one of the hardest things to do. We're all among friends, the 300 of us on this call. So here's what I'll say. It is a constant reminder of living values and practicing and actually living those values. I am not going to, go into all the details about the various conversations I've had over the years about that piece of maintaining our commitment to sharing power, to community-led, community-driven approaches. I've had to have those conversations internally with leadership, and with the board. I've had to have that conversation at times with the county council. I've had to help educate some of our other institutional partners about the necessity for philanthropy to operate differently. It's not easy, and it's a. I wonder, it isn't a case, Susan, where I'd say, it sounds great. And it's, it's an easy thing to do, but at the same time, it's what a partnership requires. And part of the model that philanthropy in particular has been guilty of, and I think, and I would give, if I'm giving philanthropy credit, and I will say most of the time I don't. I think we need to, we don't look at ourselves in the mirror as much as we need to, and as a result, we don't tend to provide ourselves with constructive critique. With that said, I think this recognition that we essentially were playing a charity model for a long period of time. We have resources. We're trying to help those poor folks, and as a result, we'll pat ourselves on the back. And essentially, we were beholden to a system that worked for a particular segment of the population, and the population that had wealth, and allocated, some cases, on a generous year, 5% of that to support the community. We could have a long conversation about all sorts of things related to that, but we're not going to do that here. But with that said, the recognition that, once again, we weren't getting the outcomes that we wanted, that we all want. How do we create a place that really works for everyone? A place where everyone can really, live, work, and play. And everything that we've done, we haven't necessarily achieved that end goal. So something was broken, and we had to do something different. And I will also say, because I don't want to go as far to call it an awakening, but I would say that within philanthropy, a lot of national conversations that have occurred over the years, I think, has also kind of opened up that door to working differently. Communities of Opportunity received a national award 7 years ago from HUD, which also kind of, I think elevates, kind of the model which then allow other communities to try to, do something similar. But once again, when it comes down to it, and you're talking about resources, you're talking about power, you're talking about control, and it is a hard thing, despite your best attempts, to let go. But one of the things that, in particular, when I was leading the programs team, that I was really clear about, that it wasn't our money, we're brokers. And that our job is to make sure that we are engaging in partnership with those that are actually doing the work. So, we have some accountability, yet at the same time, we also need to make sure that we're resourcing and partnering with community in a way that actually works for them.
Yeah, I find it interesting just discussing it. It is, it's a paradigm shift. And I do find that one of the places I personally struggle, but I also see around me struggles, is that it's hard to work and it takes longer. Yeah. And, how do you assuage those that, especially maybe donors to the Seattle Foundation, who want to see impact now, that the process is going to take a little bit longer, but yet have a better outcome?
Another great question, Susan, and I know you guys talked to Vu earlier, and I in our pre-call I made the reference that Vu and I are similar. We have some similar thoughts. We approach it from different perspectives, but we have some similar thoughts. So this is where I would say. One of the things that's been very successful for me is utilizing my own power and privilege. And what I mean by that is I'm on the leadership team. I have I've led the foundation's grant making team. I have relationships with board, donors, public sector, private sector. So there's, and a lot of, and because of those networks and audiences, I have the ability to kind of bring certain things in to kind of help make a case. So be more specific about that. So the belief that they're, not a big surprise. With donors, and sometimes just even with institutional philanthropy, and surely in the public sector, we can solve this issue in 24 months. And then I go, well, best of luck to you, because it's taken more than 24 months to actually get to this point. So help me understand how you're going to get to that place. And what, once again, the approach was, we will get the best and brightest minds, or we'll get the C-suiters together, we'll organize and come up with a game plan and then go and move forward. Well, once again, this is that thing of now I'm on a roll, because now it has kind of fueled all sorts of things. This has always been the fundamental problem that we have, not only in the region, but in society. We hold a community accountable. We nitpick, and I'm pointing in particular to philanthropy. We nitpick with community, rather than giving them unrestricted support, or that $125,000 grant. Oh, we'll give you $25,000 because you really don't need all that money, or whatever it is, and we want the 10 reports, Yet we don't hold accountable the C-suiters, or those who have resources, who say they're going to do X and then don't do it. So that was a little fire. Sorry. So what I like to help folks remember is that a lot of these issues, all of these issues that we're dealing with, are structural. They lead back to a problem with a structural thing. 9 times out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, it is structural racism. But maybe there's a 1 out of 10 times where it isn't. Point being is that pointing to end goal and the things that need to be done, and breaking down that perception that, there's urgency. Obviously, we want to solve affordable housing tomorrow. We want to address climate change tomorrow. But some things actually require us to take a step back in order to move quickly. And this has been part of the challenging dynamic. And I'm not going to say that we have solved it, because I get it as well. I mean, I would love to wave the magic wand and get it done tomorrow. But once again, I go back to the equation piece of building the relational, experiencing the transactional to achieve the transformational. We have been working and dealing with a homeless issue since 1999. Back in 99, it was, it's a 10-year plan to end homelessness. Needless to say, they revised the name. They stopped calling it a 10-year plan because they knew it wasn't going to happen in 10 years. And I think there were some lessons learned from that experience that has sharpened what is happening now, which is great. Yet at the same time, siloed, fragmented approaches. So I don't know if you ever get away from, look, individuals and sometimes still institutions, they're still going to have, a kind of a short time or, kind of shorter view of like, we really want to concentrate our effort in this period of time. You know what? If that's what you want to do, go for it. But, just be clear then that you're not going to achieve any of the transformational piece. That it's, you'll have some nice outputs and that could still be fine. But can you find a way to tether whatever you are trying to do to something that might then take the next step and build it towards that transformational piece?
I find that really compelling because I do think that there's, the overarching issues, and then there's the day-to-day issues. And I do think that as a larger philanthropy, Seattle Foundation, the University of Washington, we have a responsibility to address the things that only we can do because we have a voice, the power, and the funding. So I find that very compelling to think about that we need to step maybe away from the transactional a little bit and work on the larger picture.
Yeah.
2 comments from Amy, our fabulous Amy, helping us out here. One, she just wanted me to make another plug for Thought Exchange, and she'll put, Robbie will put a link in the chat box so that if you want to remember, go to Thought Exchange and drop your ideas in there if you feel like it. And then I thought I'd grab one of the top questions we've seen so far, which I thought was an interesting one. It's a little bit day-to-day, but has the staffing model changed or needed to change in order to slow down and focus on the relationships and community? And how has that changed and the way you've communicated with people?
Great question. The answer is yes. But not dramatically. So what I would say, when I hire a program officer, I'm not, if I can get the subject matter expertise, that's great. But what I've always put as a premium is their ability to work with people. So, in particular at a community foundation, at Seattle Foundation, which is different from Gates or a corporate foundation like Microsoft. A program officer might have a meeting at 9:00 with a philanthropist, and then at 11:00 have a meeting with the ED at the East African Community Services Organization, and then have a meeting with a colleague at Rakes at 1, and then a meeting with someone at the county or the city later that day. So 4 different sectors, 4 different types of relationships. And the ability to be able to bridge becomes really important. So I would always place a value on, getting the right, the people who have really kind of the right, and are actually people or people persons or whatever that term is. But essentially like folks who are comfortable building relationship with folks. I can train you to be a great grant maker. I can't train you to be a better connector or broker or relationship builder. So, so that was always kind of a thread. But then essentially, we grew our team more because since we weren't doing the peanut butter spread and we were concentrating our grants in more targeted ways, we built up our evaluation, the evaluation component on our team, brought in more people of color onto the team. So right now, the program team of 13, 60% are people of color. So, and that's the most diverse team within Seattle Foundation. So, there are definitely some shifts and changes in terms of composition, but then also in terms of, what are the capacities that we need within the team in order to, hold ourselves accountable, but also provide some technical support. So like the last piece I'd add in terms of staffing changes or staffing model, we also knew that there would be a need to support capacity building. So we would do that from a grant making standpoint, but what were some of the more internal things that we could do? So once again, bringing in more technical skills around, helping our nonprofits partners with whether it's fundraising support or in some, technology or whatever it may be. So those would be some of the things that we added to the team.
Fantastic. I would love to hear a little bit about your new program, which is only somewhat new, but the Civic Commons. Can you tell us about that and how that came to be and who was at the table helping you form that?
Yeah. So this kind of circles back to a lot of the evolution of the foundation. So leading the effort, moving away from a responsive grant making program to a proactive grant or community partner investor. But I had this realization a few years ago that fundamentally, we could be doing all the right things. Our investments we have a vibrant democracy initiative. We have a catalyzing community initiative. We have a climate justice initiative. Our funding to organizations led by people of color dramatically increased. Our grant sizes increased. We're funding policy and system work. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. And I still came to the conclusion that fundamentally we weren't going to achieve any of the outcomes that we needed to achieve because we operate in a pretty siloed and fragmented region. So I use affordable housing as a great example. I mean, this region has an incredible, well, prior to COVID, and COVID will probably make it even more challenging. Affordable housing was one of the biggest issues that this region was facing. And honestly, there really wasn't an affordable housing game plan. I mean, everyone talked about it, but county has its affordable housing approach or focus on middle income, but then the city was doing its thing, and then Challenge Seattle, which is a cohort of CEOs doing its thing. Philanthropy is doing its thing, but the nonprofit housing developers are doing their thing. But then you have the housing authorities doing their thing. There were 17 different apples trying to address affordable housing. 17 different apples with, honestly, about 17 different bites of those 17 different apples. How could we ever get to something that was coherent? Can we get to one apple with 17 different bites? So I had a conversation with Tony, CEO at the time, and I stepped out of my role as VP into a new role, leading Civic Commons, which is it's not a grant maker. We're not a grant maker. We're very complementary. We're a house of brands. So essentially, if you think Seattle Foundation is Procter & Gamble, then Civic Commons is Tide. We're a brand of Seattle Foundation, but untethered, intentionally. And what Civic Commons is trying to do is to build the relational across the various sectors that are siloed: public sector, private sector, philanthropy, nonprofit sector, and community, in order to experience the transactional to achieve the transformational. fundamentally, I mean, what we're trying to do is create a sense of belonging, building off of work of John Powell and then Marshall Gantz. What's the story of us? What's the story of now? And how do we build the story of tomorrow? But if we don't feel tethered to each other, we don't recognize that we have mutual dependency, that we need each other, then we are not going to achieve anything. And I think, we can all look back and see that has well been documented in this region. We don't elevate or incorporate community voice into the equation. At times, we don't elevate and incorporate the private sector voice in some of the policy conversations that we're having in the region. So it doesn't, what we do an effective job of is othering. What belonging is really creating the story of us. But if we can create the story of us, how do we start to shift the narrative of the region towards one of belonging and one of shared prosperity? So we have a scorecard for shared prosperity, which isn't about solely about economic prosperity. It's about the prosperity of the region from a health and well-being standpoint. GDP could be growing at 6.5%, but if the percentage of households that are paying more than 30% for their housing continues to increase, we're nowhere near being a healthy, prosperous region. You disaggregate that by race, then we really kind of see where the gaps are. And then there is the third pillar of what we call network weaving. And essentially it's the next evolution of collective impact. We don't need everyone in the same boat together, but we need everyone swimming in the same direction with each other. So how do we leverage the assets that private sector, public sector, philanthropy, nonprofit community bring to the table and move towards something collective that actually moves us towards a transformational piece? So in many ways, Susan, this gets back to short-term versus long-term. We're playing the long game here. And in many ways, it's why it's complementary to Seattle Foundation is Seattle Foundation will always have a philanthropy agenda. What the Commons is doing is what's the region's agenda? We're not beholden to philanthropy. We're not beholden to the public sector, the private sector. We're beholden to the region. So how do we create the place where we are tethered together, but working intentionally towards something that is important? And the only thing I'll say is with COVID, with the two pandemics of COVID and racism, if we don't recognize right now that in this region we're at a pivot point and that we can't go it alone, we're screwed. And that's what we're trying to avoid is that, we are trying to bridge, build, bond, and then drive folks towards something that works for everyone.
Michael, we got a question about measuring success. So I'd like to point back to something that you just briefly mentioned, and that's if people have an opportunity to go to the Civic Commons website, there is the scoreboard for shared prosperity. Did I say it right?
Scorecard, yeah.
Scorecard for shared prosperity.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a different way of measuring outcome. It's saying if the community's better, we're doing a better job. So I highly recommend people investigate that. I wish we had time to just talk about that all day because I'm a nerd. But how would you say that you use that scorecard in making behavioral changes?
I have two different answers. The scorecard isn't an indicator project. It is a communication and change project. So what do I mean by that? So we presented what's probably more important than the data is a framework, and that framework of shared prosperity. So not to go into all the gory details, but we have these 5 dimensions that we feel are really important for regional leaders to pay attention to. Are individuals, households, and communities thriving? Is our democracy and economy vibrant? And once again, if you disaggregate by race, have we narrowed, if not eliminated, the racial disproportionality associated with the data that we do see. So the Commons isn't presenting strategy, we're just presenting information, but within a framework. And that's the piece, Susan, that we're, in terms of measurement of success. Yes, I mean, I would love to see those indicators move in a positive direction and see the racial disproportionality disappear, if not be eliminated. But more important to me is getting adoption of that framework, because that means that we are looking in totality. It's not just, we're looking at one aspect of kind of Greater Seattle's health. We're looking at it in whole. Doesn't mean that we all need to play in the whole. You can still play in your particular area, but that it's tied to something else. The other piece I'll say, and this always comes as maybe a little bit of surprise to folks, because grant makers aren't necessarily known for this, but I tend to color outside the lines when it comes to measurements or what determines success, or what are we holding folks accountable to. I mean, yes, there are in some cases it's, if you say that you're going to build 1,000 affordable housing units, well, did you build 1,000 affordable housing units? I can hold you to that. But frankly, given a lot of the work that folks are doing, it's harder. It's much more complex. And what I've led, with my team and as a result then within the foundation is, we still want the final report. We want to know what you did, but measurements of success for us have tended to be more in terms of, because we do operating support, unrestricted support, it's more of how have you grown? What are you doing? What are you doing that's different? And trying to establish, some different baselines. So once again, there are some quantitative items that we can hold our partners to, but that's on them. They say X, great. That's what you say. We'll hold you to that. We're not putting X on you. But the qualitative piece becomes was as important to us, because once again, what we're trying to do is build, well, I shouldn't say once again, because I didn't say it. Why we made the shift that we did was to build power. And sometimes we can't hold organizations that were under-resourced for decades to the same level of well-established, well-resourced organizations. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to us. So it's not saying we turn a blind eye to things and don't have any accountability metrics in place, but we're trying to, we're also trying to build power here. So, we tend to have, some other things that we put into place. So it's a long-winded way of saying, I want folks to adhere to the scorecard. And when I think about the measurements of success for Civic Commons, they tend to be pretty aspirational because of what we're trying to do. We're not a program deliverer. We are not a grant maker. We are a convener, a communicator, and a catalyst. So what really will determine success for us is whether or not this region creates a healthy sense of belonging. It adopts a shared prosperity scorecard. And then, frankly, folks are working together in order to tackle the really gnarly issues that we're facing in the region.
Interesting. We have gotten so many good questions. I'm going to address one other one and then ask for some final thoughts from you. This is one I'm not super comfortable with myself, because it's actually directed at me. And I normally would just gloss over this and say, we're here for Michael, which is true, but I will do it to put myself in the discomfort zone. It says, Susan, what work are you doing to educate yourself and others across racial initiatives to engage community? In the previous session, Vu centered questions back to Lee, and I thought this was important to put this back on UW leadership and experts. First of all, I'm not necessarily the best person to think on my feet, but I would say that I think part of this is actually being okay with answering this question, because I realize that I have a voice in this, and that it isn't all about putting this on Michael to solve my problems and to say, this is how we do it, because it's not easy. I'm learning a lot of discomfort with fuzziness, and that inclusivity, as opposed to just straight up outcomes, it's a process. And the process is as important, more important than just meeting goals one by one, by one by one. So I have a lot, obviously, of education to do. I feel like the community and advancement is doing a great job helping me with that, but it's my own journey. I would say that, where you don't really need to know where I am on the journey. I will say that, COVID struck me hard, and the pandemic, of seeing the structural racism that my colleagues and friends have to experience every day is a painful truth. That's a process for me too. So I wanted to address that, only to show that there's a lot of work to be done, and I have to be a part of that work, a big part of that work. So, Michael, I think you have really opened our eyes. I love the idea that I feel really inspired by your comfort with a fuzziness that I don't have that comfort with, and that I'm going to spend more time with. How about that? I'm going to value it more.
Yeah. I appreciate that, Susan. And the only thing I would add is, one of the running jokes that I have with the team is that, I operate at the 40,000 foot level. And on one hand, that is an incredible superpower to have, because you can see everything. It's like a puzzle. And at the same time, it becomes really hard to land anything. So I've surrounded myself with really smart, talented people who push me and force me to kind of, break it down. But the reason why I view it as a superpower is that, once again, the things that we're trying to solve are so complex. And I wish it was easy. I mean, I wish the task of the day was make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Great. I'm all over that. I can figure that out. But unfortunately, it's not. Help me understand how to address access to capital for Black-owned businesses in the region. Well, I have a few ideas, and it's going to take time. So as a result, I've tried to give myself some grace, but more importantly, I've tried to give myself team the grace, because if we're not making mistakes, if we're not making mistakes, that means we're not pushing ourselves, and we're doing the easy stuff. Mm-hmm. We're really fundamentally trying to shift things. The reason why they haven't been shifted is because either one, no one wanted to do it because they're beholden to the system, or two, it's goddamn hard. So I'd rather have y'all go push yourselves, go and do it. I would always grant for my team, the pass. If you make a mistake, great. Make another mistake. Just learn from the ones that you make. And then let's see where we end up. So that's why I can have that comfort with fuzziness, because I don't know, we're trying to figure this stuff out.
I appreciate that you don't let fear drive your agenda. And that's something I have a lot to learn from you. Michael, I can't thank you enough. This has been just a true pleasure for me personally, and I know it was valuable for the audience in so many ways. But I also need to thank you for your service and being a part of the University of Washington. As an alum, you are a member of our family forever. As a part of this community, we are intertwined forever and ever, and we appreciate your service. And today's contribution is absolutely invaluable. Thank you so much. Thank you. For people who came today, thank you so much. I hope that this was a good perspective and thought-provoking for you. I find myself sitting with trying to interpret some of the things, the difference between the University of Washington as part of and a change maker in the community, and our community, including students, faculty, our staff, and the research that we're putting out in the world and the activities in the community, is a little different than a community foundation, but there's a lot that translates here. So let's bring this home, people, and let's make this work for us together. I'm going to pass this back to Rabia, Ellen, and Amy, who have done such a tremendous job today, and thank them profusely for the opportunity today.